Now, there are probably hundreds of ways you can make your arrangements more interesting over time, but none compared to the power of adding a B section. This is a great little musical section that's different from your main part of the song, that captivates listeners, drive your tracks forward, and makes them just feel way more professional. Today's lesson is going to be from my Producer Launchpad program. This is where I help producers on a one-on-one basis bring their music up to a quality where they can release it out into the world, no matter what genre they make. So if you are interested in working with me one-on-one, I'll leave a link down in the description and let's chat. But for now, let's get into today's lesson.
So let's talk about B sections, what they mean, how they apply in electronic music, and what we can do with them. So a B section is simply a section of your track that's musically different to a pre-existing section. Now, there are many types of electronic music, particularly club and dance-oriented electronic music, that have one A section. And that A section just has very subtle variations over time to it to keep it interesting. In other words, you don't need a B section in your track to have it complete. However, in certain styles, especially ones that tend towards the pop structure or, more melodically driven styles of electronic dance music, we'll use B sections, even C, D, and E sections to keep them interesting. This is particularly true from an intro to a build or a breakdown, from a breakdown to a drop. A sections can become B sections or swap back to A sections, etc. That being said though, there's no specific rule saying you have to introduce a B section only in the drop or only in the second drop. They can really pop up anywhere. All it is, again, is just a musical difference. For example, a switch up of the chord progression, a switch up of the melody, a switch up of the rhythm, fundamentally speaking. To demonstrate this, I've just loaded up a track from AU5 here called Waiting. You'll hear that the A section, B section, and the eventual C section aren't actually all that different, but they're significant enough musical changes to justify calling them different sections, A, B, and C in this case. So let's listen to the A section in the intro and the kind of verse here.
I don't wish you ill, I only wish you and I could say I wish that you would, but I don't think you will. Don't come back, 'cause I'll take you back.
Now things change up in this second half of the section here. However, it's still the same fundamental musical idea, it's just a few more layers. That's not what we would call a B section. However, let's listen to the transition into this section here.
It's good. Tell me that you feel the same, and that you wish I would tell you to come back.
Now, this is different enough to be called a B section. However, the underlying chord progression is actually not all that different. In fact, this is probably musically speaking not that crazy of a B section. The only real difference is one subtle chord adjustment and a different melody, right? And the chord adjustment kind of creates a new rhythm as well. So where this chord progression goes, dun, 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 there's kind of 3 bass notes in that first section there, whereas this one is kind of dun, dun. There's a different rhythm in that first bar or 2, right? This B section then continues through the build.
If you come back, I won't be too hard to find.
And then comes into the drop. Then we kind of go back to the A section in this little breakdown here. Again, slightly different chord progression here. And then we have kind of a C section here, which is very similar to the B section, but the melody is slightly different. Again, different enough to justify calling it another section. Same underlying chord progression and chord rhythm, even same bass notes, I believe, but the melody is unique enough to justify calling this a second section, or a C section in this case, which then continues into the build and drop. Right, and that pretty much continues through the second drop, and then it goes back to the A at the end for the outro. Those 3 chords right in the beginning, back to the A section. Very reminiscent of this.
I don't wish you ill.
Right, so that's an example of A, B, and in this case, C sections, right? Now that was a more extreme example of a B section. I'm going to use a more subtle example in my drum and bass track I've been working on here. Now basically, I've got kind of 2 alternating main sections, which you could argue are actually just both part of, you know, an A section, although this is probably technically actually a C section, and I'll kind of explain that to you now. So I have in my intro these chord stabs, as I've shown in an earlier lesson, and they kind of rhythmically change in this section here. But there's this underlying sample here, which is kind of musically different. And then the drop kind of then functions like a B section, because the drop sounds like this. And then the build sounds like this. Even though the piano stack is still there, it kind of doesn't matter if it's there. The chord stab is taking precedence. Anyway, the point is that those sections kind of interrelate, you know, they come in and out of each other throughout this drop. And then in the breakdown, the chord stabs come back into this C section where things change up a bit more significantly. There's an ARP down here. Chord pattern changes up. Bass pattern changes up. No drums. Right, so that's just a little subtle C section in this case, just to vary up what's been going on for most of the track. Sometimes it's nice in an extended breakdown to do something like this, just to musically vary it up. Again, look at the big picture stuff, changing the chord progression or main sample, changing the melody, changing the rhythm of things. That's how you create a different enough B section. And the more you do different, the generally more different it will feel, right? If you do a subtle change, it's not really going to feel like a B section. Right, so to recap, B sections, completely optional but really helpful to create a musically different section in your track. They can appear anywhere in the arrangement, whether it's in the drop, in the build, in the breakdown, in the intro, whatever. It's just something that's a useful tool. That is it for B sections. In the next lesson, I'm going to be going into how the mixdown and your arrangement relate to one another. It's a very important lesson because once we get our arrangement kicked off, fleshed out like we've got here, full arrangement, right? The mixdown starts to become the next thing we think about. But if you do your arrangement right, you'll save yourself a lot of headaches, a lot of heartaches down the line. So I'll show you some really helpful hints in that lesson, and I'll see you there.
All right, I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Again, if you want to work with me one-on-one, whether you need help creating B sections or something else entirely, check out my link in the description to join my Producer Launchpad program. We've got many students inside making all sorts of different genres, from trap to dubstep to techno, trance, house, whatever. We'd love to see you inside, and until next time, happy producing.